right, excited to start a new segment here on the LA Slant Podcast that I like to call Fantasy Fives. And today it's all about the quarterbacks. I'm going to give you the 5 quarterbacks that I am targeting in drafts this season. And the caveat here is that I'm not overdrafting a quarterback. I'm not going to do it. I'd love to have Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Andrew Luck. I'd love to have all those guys. And if things break right, maybe one of them ends up on one of my teams. But more likely than not, I'm going to wait as long as possible on a quarterback, and I'm going to load up on the wide receiver and running back position. So let's say for the sake of this conversation, Rodgers, Brady, Brees, Ryan, Luck. I think Cam gets overdrafted. I think Roethlisberger gets overdrafted. Dak, Derek Carr, Russell Wilson. I think I just named 10 guys that I'm totally fine with passing up on if the time isn't right to pull the trigger. So let's get into the 5 quarterbacks that I am all in on in 2017. We'll go 5-1. We'll start with Eli Manning. And Eli wasn't great last year. He had over 4,000 yards passing, 26 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, a little sloppy with the football. But you look what the Giants did this offseason offensively. You already have Odell Beckham in a contract year. Sterling Shepard had a nice rookie season. You bring in Brandon Marshall from the Jets, who's 2 years removed from arguably the best season of his career, 14 touchdowns. Then you draft Evan Ingram, probably the most athletic tight end from this rookie class. A lot of comparisons to Jordan Reed. So I look at the guys that the Giants brought in, and I look at what they did last year. And they were in something called 11 personnel. Over 90% of the time, it was Ben McAdoo's first year as a head coach. And 11 personnel is essentially 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a running back. Not a lot of creativity from Ben McAdoo in his first year. And I think with the new additions, you're going to see more creativity. In fact, McAdoo vows to be more creative in 2017. And I think that's going to bode well for Eli. The thing about Eli, he's an Iron Man. He doesn't miss a start, but he's inconsistent. You know, he had a game last year, over 400 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, followed it up, sub 200 yard passing game with 0 touchdowns. So there are some inconsistencies there. It can be maddening. And if you're not 100% comfortable with Eli as your QB1, I get that. But that doesn't mean you can't pair him with somebody else. And one of those guys could be my number 4 guy, and that's Phillip Rivers. And I'm super high on Phillip Rivers this season. He lost Keenan Allen in week 1 last year. Danny Woodhead went down early. And he had to bring some of these younger guys along, like Dontrell Inman and Tyrell Williams, Hunter Henry. The offense is loaded in 2017. You draft Mike Williams from Clemson. Keenan Allen comes back. Inman and Williams, they're a year wiser. I think Hunter Henry's going to take a huge leap in 2017. And then you have the Hall of Famer Antonio Gates. The thing about Phillip Rivers, all he does is throw for 4,000 yards. He had 4,300 yards passing last year, 33 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, sloppy with the football. But I think a lot of that he was pressing last year. He didn't have his guys out there. So when you're trying to make plays, sometimes you throw interceptions. I think that number is going to come down a little bit this year. But he's thrown for 4,000 yards 8 times in his career. He's never missed a start. And if everything breaks right for the Chargers, Phillip Rivers could have a monster year. You know, and they've been snake bitten by injuries in the past. But if all these guys are healthy, you add Williams to an already good offense. I think they have the potential to be great. I really do. So I'd be happy to wait for Phillip Rivers in a fantasy football draft. All right, number 3, Jameis Winston. And it felt like everyone, including myself, thought last season was the year that Jameis was going to break out. I remember watching the Bucs and the Falcons in Atlanta week 1, and Jameis had 4 touchdowns, 281 yards. And I thought that drafting him late was the move. I thought he was going to win me a league. Week 2 comes along. They get beat by the Cardinals 40-7. 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. And that was the theme of the year. He was just very sloppy with the football, Jameis was. But Mike Evans, he returns. He's in a contract year. I think he's the second best fantasy receiver behind Antonio Brown. Had 1,300 yards receiving last year, 12 touchdowns, 175 targets. That target number is going to go down a little bit this year because you had Deshaun Jackson to the mix. Arguably one of the greatest deep threats in NFL history. Cameron Brate, he was a nice surprise at tight end last year. You draft O.J. Howard, probably the most complete tight end in the draft from Alabama. So this offense is going to attack defenses on all levels. And I think Jameis is going to have an opportunity to have a big year. I think Deshaun Jackson makes a world of difference. He's going to stretch the field. He's going to open up more opportunities for Mike Evans. And Mike Evans is just so good. He's going to take advantage of any opportunity that you give him. Last year, Jameis ranked 16th in fantasy points among quarterbacks, according to ESPN. I say he cracks the top 10 in 2017. If all of his weapons stay healthy, I think he's due for a big year. All right, number 2. I love this guy, Marcus Mariota. He had a stretch in the middle of the season last year. I think it was week 5 to week 12. He averaged 24 fantasy points. Now, unfortunately, playoff time, he came up a little small. He got hurt in week 16. Still, I look at what he did during that 8-game stretch, and I think he can sustain that in 2017 from start to finish. This is a crazy number. This is from Pro Football Focus. Marcus Mariota's career red zone numbers: 60 of 94, 33 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He didn't turn the ball over. He can also win with his legs. He was 6th in rushing yards among quarterbacks. He only had 2 rushing touchdowns. I expect that number to go up. And a number that you look at and you could be like, I don't know, 24th among quarterbacks in attempts. I think that number is going to go up this year based on the personnel. When you bring in Corey Davis, wide receiver from Western Michigan, you bring in a veteran like Eric Decker, you're going to throw the football more. This offense is going to be better than it was last year. And I think Marcus Mariota is going to take a leap into the top 10 among fantasy quarterbacks. So that leaves one guy, my number 1 guy, and I think most people are sleeping on him despite his incredible 2016 season, and that's Kirk Cousins. I think people are sleeping on Kirk Cousins in 2017. He was a top 5 quarterback last year, but when Jackson and Garcon left this offseason via free agency, I felt this shift away from Cousins, which I believe is wrong, because I think there's guys on this roster that will make up for Garcon and Jackson not being there. They have 216 targets to account for. Jamison Crowder, I think he's the one to own. Outside of Jordan Reed, I think he's the wide receiver that should come off the board before all of them. I think Terrell Pryor, big body, is going to be very helpful to Kirk Cousins in the red zone. Josh Doxson, another guy whose rookie season was derailed by his Achilles. He's another big guy who's going to help in the red zone. The Redskins were not good in the red zone. Cousins' numbers last season: 4,900 yards, 25 touchdowns, 12 picks. I think the passing yards are going to come down a little bit. I think the touchdowns are going to go up because of all these guys that they have on offense. These big guys, Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis, Doxson, Pryor. And if Kirk's still on the board after the first 7 or 8 quarterbacks are selected, I'm all in. Get me Kirk Cousins on my fantasy team in 2017. All right. That'll do it for the first installment of Fantasy Fives. We'll have more throughout the offseason, get you ready for your fantasy football drafts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the LA Slant Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. And until next time, we'll see you soon.